I want to be clear about one thing before I tell you any of this. I am not the kind of person who believes in ghosts. I grew up in Florissant, Missouri, 20 minutes north of St. Louis, in a two-bedroom house with carpet the color of old mustard and a father who worked double shifts at a warehouse until his back gave out. I believe in rent. I believe in overdraft fees. I believe in the particular kind of exhaustion that lives in your shoulders when you've been job hunting for 6 weeks and your checking account has $43 in it and your landlord starts texting in a different tone than he used to. That's where I was in July of 2024, 24 years old, 2 months out of a logistics coordinator job that had restructured me out of existence with a form letter and a $200 gift card to a steakhouse I couldn't afford the gas to drive to. I had applied for 41 jobs. I had heard back from 3. None of them had called a second time. So when the Craigslist listing appeared, overnight security, Westfield Crossing, $300 night, no experience required, start immediately. I didn't ask a lot of questions. I know how that sounds now, but $43 has a way of softening your instincts. I called the number at the bottom of the listing. A man answered on the second ring, which seemed normal, and gave me an address in Chesterfield, which seemed normal, and told me the position was 6 nights a week, Monday through Saturday, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. He said the property management company, he called it Hargrove Meridian Property Solutions, which is the kind of name a thing calls itself when it doesn't want you asking follow-up questions, had recently acquired the asset and needed someone on site during the transition period. The asset, that's what he called it, the asset. He said I'd receive an orientation packet before my first shift. He said there was no uniform required, but closed-toe shoes were mandatory. He said cellular signal inside the building was unreliable. He said to bring a flashlight. He said, and I remember this specifically because it struck me as an odd thing to emphasize, the property has a history, but that's not something you need to concern yourself with. I said okay. I said I could start that Monday. The orientation packet arrived the next day. Not by email, by mail. A padded envelope with my name and address handwritten in ballpoint pen sent from a P.O. box in Clayton. Inside, a single sheet of paper with a floor map of Westfield Crossing, a laminated badge with my name printed on it, which meant they'd had my name before I gave it, though it took me 3 days to notice that, and a VHS tape. A VHS tape. In 2024, no note explaining why. I don't own a VHS player. I don't think I've owned one since I was 9. I drove to a Goodwill on Natural Bridge Road and found one for $8, brought it home, plugged it into my TV with an RCA adapter I found in a box in my closet, and watched the tape. The first 4 minutes were exactly what you'd expect from a 1990s corporate training video. Cheerful stock music, an actor in a polo shirt and a smile that had been rehearsed too many times, B-roll footage of Westfield Crossing when it was alive, the food court full of families, the escalators running, the storefronts bright and busy. At Westfield Crossing, we believe every guest deserves to feel welcome, the supervisor said. Your job is simple, make them feel like they belong. I almost turned it off after the first minute. The production value was embarrassing. The acting was the specific kind of bad you get when a company hires people who have never acted but also have never been told they can't act. Then the tape glitched. It wasn't a big glitch, 1 frame maybe less, a flash of white static, and in the middle of it a face, pale, close to the camera, closer than the supervisor had been, eyes open, not looking at the camera, looking at something just beside it. The frame was gone so fast I couldn't be sure I'd seen it. I rewound the tape twice. The third time I paused it at exactly the right moment, and yes, there it was, a face I didn't recognize. A face that did not belong in a 1990s training video, because the expression on it was not an acting expression. It was the expression of someone who needed to say something they had been told they were not allowed to say. The tape continued. The supervisor was talking again, his smile back in place, and then the tape cut to black. A voice, not the supervisor's, something flatter and older, a voice that sounded like it was being played through 2 layers of bad recording equipment, said, "Remember, they're just shoppers. Treat them like they belong." Static end of tape. I sat with it for a while. Then I drove to Chesterfield. Westfield Crossing sits off a service road behind a Costco and a strip of fast food restaurants that have given up any pretense of cohesion. A Sonic next to a Panera, next to a Payday Loan PL. Ace next to a nail salon that's been shuttered for at least 2 years. The mall itself is set back from the road, hidden behind a parking lot so large it's acquired its own weather patterns. I pulled in at 9:48 p.m. The July heat had finally broken sometime around 8, and the air felt strange for Missouri in summer, thin, almost cool, the way air gets when a storm is deciding whether to commit. The building was dark from the outside, not night dark, something more deliberate than that, the kind of dark that suggests a preference. The service entrance was unlocked. I stepped inside. The cold hit me immediately, not air conditioning. Air conditioning is a mechanical cold. It has a motor hum to it, a sense of effort. This was a settled cold, the kind that accumulates in a place that hasn't been disturbed in a long time, the kind of cold that belongs to a space more than it processes through it. It was July. It was 94 degrees outside. Inside Westfield Crossing, I could see my breath. The security office was 12 feet from the service entrance. A small room with a metal desk, a monitor bank showing grainy footage from cameras around the mall, a chair, a desk lamp, and a landline phone. On the desk, someone had left a paper cup of coffee that was still faintly warm, which meant someone had been here recently, but the parking lot had been empty when I pulled in, and I hadn't passed anyone on the way through the service corridor. And on the desk, next to the coffee, was the card. Laminated, index card sized, written in black Sharpie in handwriting that pressed hard into the surface, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who wants to make sure the marks stay. At the top, in capital letters, Night Guard Survival Protocol. Below that, a numbered list. I stood there in the cold of a dead mall at 10 p.m. on a Monday in July, and I read it. I want to say I laughed. I want to say I took a photo, texted my friend Marcus something like, "Get a load of this," and went back to reading a book on my phone. I want to say the card felt like a joke, a hazing ritual left by the previous guard, the kind of thing bored people do to new co-workers. But the coffee was still warm, and no car had left the parking lot, and the cold in that building felt intentional in a way I didn't have words for yet. I read the card. The fluorescent lights above the security desk hummed at a frequency I'd never heard from fluorescent lights before. Not the standard 60 Hz flicker, something slower, something that wasn't quite a pattern but also wasn't quite random, like a heartbeat that had learned to be irregular on purpose. I should have walked out right then, I know that, but $43. I read the card again, and somewhere in the dead corridors of Westfield Crossing, something that had been very still began, very slowly, to move. The rules were handwritten in what I can only describe as careful urgency, the print of someone who needed to get the information down before they couldn't anymore, but who also understood that sloppy communication might cost someone their life. I read them aloud. I don't know why. Maybe because reading something silently in an empty building feels less real than saying it out loud. Maybe because I needed to hear a voice, even if it was my own. Maybe because some part of me, some very old and stupid and animal part of me, thought that speaking words gave them power, and I wanted to feel powerful in that cold, dark building at 10 p.m. That was a mistake. That was the first price. Rule 1. Never acknowledge the girl in the food court after 12 a.m. She's been waiting since 1996. Rule 2. If the escalators start moving, ride them to the second floor. Do not walk away. Rule 3. The store's Sunrise Boutique will have its lights on, Do not enter. You won't leave the same. Rule 4. If you hear the emergency broadcast system, cover your ears and hum your favorite song. Do not listen to the message. Rule 5. If you see your reflection waving, wave back. If you don't, tilde tilde. The rest of Rule 5 was crossed out in red ink so thick and deliberate that the Sharpie had nearly worn through the laminate. Whatever came after, if you don't, was gone. Redacted. Removed from the record with the kind of finality that made me very certain, in the wordless way your body knows things before your brain catches up, that the crossed-out portion was the most important part of the list. I finished reading. My voice sounded smaller when I was done, like the act of reading the rules had used up more of me than speaking usually does. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize, not the property manager's number, not anyone in my contacts, just a number. The text said, "You read them out loud, didn't you? That's the first price. Check your left hand." The phone felt cold in my hand. I looked down. Around the base of my left pinky finger, not deep, not bleeding, just there, precise and clean as a line drawn by someone who knew exactly where to draw it, was a thin red mark, a circle, like someone had pressed a heated wire against my skin in a perfect ring. I turned my hand over. The line went all the way around. I pressed it with my thumb. No pain, no sensation at all. Which was, I think, worse than if it had hurt. I stood very still for a moment and tried to construct a rational explanation. The rational explanations I came up with were, I had somehow scratched myself without noticing. I was experiencing a stress response that was manifesting as a tactile hallucination, or something in the security office had marked my finger while I was distracted. None of these explanations were satisfying. None of them accounted for the text message, which I read again and which still said what it had said the first time. I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. The number, when I tried to call it, gave me a tone I'd never heard from a phone before, not a busy signal, not a disconnect message. A tone that sustained itself without changing pitch, which is not a sound a phone line makes, which is not a sound that should exist. I put my phone down. I want to tell you that I decided, in that moment, to think of the rules as a kind of game, that I put on my security guard face, which is just my normal face with slightly reduced eyebrow activity, and committed to treating the night as an unusually atmospheric job shift. I want to tell you that my pragmatism won out over my fear. What actually happened is that I sat in the security chair for 11 minutes without moving, watching the camera monitors, and talked myself into staying by doing the math on what I needed the $300 for. Groceries, internet bill, the copay for my prescription that I'd been skipping for 6 weeks. $300, and all I had to do was sit in an abandoned mall until 6 a.m. The rules, I told myself, were a joke, someone's idea of atmosphere. But the red line on my finger didn't feel like a joke. And the coffee that had been warm when I arrived, with no car in the parking lot, with no one having passed me on the way in, that didn't feel like a joke either. And the text message, the one that knew I'd read the rules aloud before I'd told anyone I had. I pulled the laminated card toward me and looked at it again. Read it again, this time silently. Felt, as I did, a particular quality of attention coming from somewhere in the dark mall behind me. Not a sound, not a movement, just attention. The specific sense of being observed by something that has had a great deal of practice staying very quiet. The rules were a contract. I understood that now, in the way you understand things you don't want to understand, not as a theory, but as a fact that arrives fully formed, without argument, settling into you like sediment. The rules were a negotiation with something that had been here since before the mall closed, since before the mall was built, possibly, something old, something patient. Something that had been watching the guards come and go for long enough, that it had figured out the exact minimum terms required to keep one here. Not protection, a contract. And I had already signed it. The red line on my pinky felt, if I focused on it, like a notification, a receipt, a very quiet reminder that the fine print was now in effect. The fluorescent light above me buzzed once, hard, then settled back into its wrong frequency hum. Somewhere in the dark, beyond the security office door, at the far end of the mall that I couldn't see from any of the camera monitors, something made a sound that might have been footsteps, or might have been the building settling, or might have been neither. I checked my watch, 10:23 p.m. An hour and 37 minutes until midnight, until Rule 1 became relevant. I sat very still, and I waited, and I tried not to think about what it meant that a rule about a girl who had been waiting since 1996 existed in the first place. What it meant that someone had needed to write it down, had needed to warn someone else about it, which meant someone else had found out about her the hard way. I tried not to think about the crossed-out rule. I tried, most of all, not to look at my left hand. By midnight, I had done 3 security walks of the main corridor and found nothing. By which I mean I found nothing that moved, nothing that spoke, nothing that broke the specific quality of stillness that had settled over Westfield Crossing like a second skin. What I did find, on the second walk, was the food court. It occupied the center of the mall's ground floor, a round, high-ceilinged atrium with a ring of shuttered restaurant facades around its perimeter, the franchise signs still mounted but dark, the chairs and tables still arranged as they had been in 2009, when the last employee locked up for the last time and didn't come back. Some of the chairs had been knocked over by 15 years of nothing in particular. The floors were tile, a 1990s geometric pattern in blue. Burgundy and forest green, the specific color combination that was everywhere in the early part of that decade, as if every shopping mall in America had gotten the same memo about what the future was supposed to look like. In the center of the food court, rising from the floor through a gap in the tiles that had been designed for exactly this purpose, was a concrete base where something had been mounted and then removed. The bolts were still there. The concrete around them was newer than the rest of the floor, a gray island in the middle of the burgundy and green. A plaque on the base said, "The WSTFILD Carousel, a gift to OUR community." The carousel was gone, had been gone since, I assumed, sometime around when the mall closed, but the base remained, and the bolts, and the plaque, and the ring of tile around it worn smooth by years of small shoes walking circles while parents waited. The only light in the food court came from a single Sbarro sign above the shuttered pizza counter, the illuminated logo still somehow powered, casting a red-orange glow over maybe 10 feet of floor in every direction. Everything beyond that radius was dark in a way that felt structural. I noted all of this on my first walk and moved on. I did not go back to the food court on my second or third walks. At 12:07 a.m., my walkie-talkie crackled. The walkie-talkie was a standard issue unit I'd found in the security office. I had tested it before my shift began, keyed the PTT button, said something into it, confirmed it was on and working. No one had responded, because there was no one to respond, because I was the only person in the building. I had set it to the channel listed in the orientation packet and clipped it to my belt and forgotten about it. At 12:07 a.m. it crackled, and then a voice came through it. A child's voice, a girl's voice. Small, careful, with the particular quality of a child who has learned to speak quietly in order not to be told to stop speaking. "Excuse me, I'm lost." I stood in the service corridor and did not move for a moment. Rule 1 lived in my head with uncomfortable clarity, never acknowledge the girl in the food court after 12 a.m. She's been waiting since 1996. I walked to the maintenance closet near the service entrance. I found a mop, a bucket, and cleaning supplies. I took the mop and the bucket, and I walked to the food court. She was there. She sat at a table in the outer ring of the food court, beyond the Esbaro light in the dark, facing away from me, small, maybe 9 years old, maybe 10. A denim jacket, the kind from the 90s with the oversized collar and the slightly too stiff fabric, the kind that hasn't been manufactured since I was a child. Dark hair, sitting with her hands in her lap, very still. I didn't look at her. I filled the bucket at the utility sink near the shuttered Panda Express, and I began mopping the tile floor of the food court. Slow, methodical work, starting at the far end from where she sat, working toward the middle. She spoke again. My mom said she'd meet me at the carousel. A pause, but it's gone now. The voice was wrong. It took me a full second to identify how, not the pitch, not the vocabulary, but the texture. There were two voices in the sound, like two recordings of the same sentence played a quarter second apart. One voice was a child's, the other was lower, older, something that had learned how to produce the sounds of a child's voice but hadn't quite gotten the resonance right. Like a recording of a recording, like something mimicking the memory of a thing rather than the thing itself. I mopped the floor. I kept my eyes on the tiles. You can tell me, the layered voice said. I know how to be quiet. I reached the middle of the food court. I was maybe 15 feet from her table. I could see her in my peripheral vision, the pale profile, the dark jacket, the stillness that was too complete for a child. Children fidget. They shift their weight. They move their hands. She had not moved since I entered the food court. She sat like something that had learned the shape of sitting from watching it done, but had never needed to do it herself. I mopped toward the carousel base. The concrete around the bolts was gritty with something I didn't examine. I worked around it carefully. I was done in 12 minutes. I wrung the mop out, set it against the bucket, picked up the bucket by the handle, and walked toward the exit corridor. I did not look at her. I did not speak. I did not acknowledge that there was anything in the food court at all. When I reached the corridor entrance, I stopped. Because she spoke one more time, and this time both voices were perfectly synchronized, speaking in the exact same moment, in the exact same tone, and what they said was, "Thank you for not seeing me." There was something in the way she said it, not anger, not grief, something older than either of those things, a quality that I can only describe as the relief of being core. Eckley recognized, like I had done the one thing she had been waiting for someone to do, and the recognition of it satisfied something deep and ancient in whatever she was, whatever both of them were. I walked back to the security office without running. I sat down, I checked my left hand. The red line was still there, unchanged. I wrote the time in the security log, 12:19 a.m. Food court, all clear. I sat with the fact that I had just written that, all clear, the most dishonest 2 words I had ever put on paper, and then I closed the log and went back to watching the monitors. On camera 7, the food court camera, the girl's table was empty. She was gone. But on camera 7, visible for just one frame before the image stabilized, was the carousel horse. Not the base, the horse itself, the white painted carousel horse that had been removed from the mall sometime in or after 1996, standing in the middle of the food court, looking at the camera. It was gone in the next frame, just tiles, just empty tables, just the Esbaro sign glowing red-orange in the dark. I didn't look for it again. I had learned already in the 43 minutes since midnight that there were things in Westfield Crossing that the rules managed but did not explain. Things that had their own logic, their own terms, their own requirements. I thought about what it meant that something had been waiting in a dead mall food court since 1996. I thought about what a 28-year wait does to a thing, whether it makes them patient or desperate, whether patience and desperation at a certain duration become the same quality. I thought about the layered voice, the older frequency inside the child's frequency. I thought about what it was practicing. At 1:30 a.m., the grinding sound started. I heard it before I understood what it was. A low mechanical shudder, the sound of gears waking up after a long stillness, the particular protest of metal parts that have been cold and static for years being asked to move again. The sound came from the center of the mall, from the main atrium, where the two escalators faced each other across a gap in the ground floor, one rising, one descending, their metal steps frozen mid-motion since 2009. I checked the camera monitors. Camera 3 covered the main atrium, and on its feed I could see the escalator, the one designated for upward travel, beginning to move. Not a tremor, not a partial activation. The steps were turning, running the full cycle, rising toward the second floor at a pace that seemed, somehow, slightly slower than normal escalator speed, deliberate, measured, as if it had somewhere specific it wanted to bring someone and was willing to wait for them to arrive. I sat at the security desk and I read Rule 2 again. If the escalators start moving, ride them to the second floor. Do not walk away. I want you to understand what it feels like to read a rule like that in context, not as a hypothetical, not as a creative exercise, but standing in the security office of a dead mall at 1:30 a.m. with the red line still on your pinky and the memory of a layered child's voice still in your ears, reading a rule that says do not walk away about something that shouldn't be moving but is. There's a version of rational thought that says, that's exactly what you shouldn't do, walking toward an inexplicably reactivated escalator in an abandoned building is not safe, you should leave. And then there's the other kind of rational thought, the kind that says, the girl spoke to you and you followed the rule and nothing took you. The rules have a logic. The rules exist because someone survived long enough to write them. The price for not following them might be worse than the price for following them. I was becoming, I think, a different kind of person in that building, not dramatically, just incrementally. The Jake Sullivan who had driven to Chesterfield with a flashlight and reasonable skepticism was already starting to recede. What was replacing him was something more adaptive, something more willing to evaluate a supernatural set of rules on their own terms rather than on the terms of a world where supernatural rules don't exist. I picked up my flashlight. I walked to the main atrium. The escalator was running. I stepped onto it. The moment my foot hit the first moving step, the mall changed. It's the only way I can describe it. Not dramatically, no flash of light, no disorientation, no sensation of movement beyond the escalator's motion. Just a shift, subtle and total, the way a color-corrected photograph differs from the original. The storefronts on either side of the main corridor were still shuttered, but they were differently shuttered. The boards over their windows were absent. The grates were pulled down the way a store pulls a grate at the end of a business day, not the way a store boards its windows against 15 years of abandonment. The lights in the corridor were dim, the kind of dim that comes from underfund. Fluorescent fixtures rather than from most of the fixtures being off. And in that dim, I could see not clearly, not with any detail that would hold up to examination, but see the shapes of people, silhouettes, moving through the corridor with the specific purposefulness of people who know where they're going. A woman with shopping bags. A teenager moving at the particular speed of someone who doesn't want to be where they are. A small child pulling against the grip of a wrist. The mall in 1996. Not fully, not tangibly, but its shadow, its residue, layered over the 2009 abandonment like a double exposure. From somewhere in the middle distance, music, the mall music that I remembered from shopping trips as a child, that particular format of elevator music that smoothed every song it touched into something vaguely familiar and entirely harmless. It was playing Don't Fear the Reaper. A Blue Oyster Cult song from 1976, and in any other context I might have found that funny, but in that mall, on that escalator, watching the shadow shoppers move through their permanent 1996 afternoon, It landed with the weight of something chosen on purpose. Someone or something had cued that song at that moment for me specifically. I rode the escalator to the second floor. The steps leveled out. I stepped off. The moment my feet touched the second floor landing, the escalator stopped. The shadow shoppers below dissolved. The dim corridor reverted to the dead dark of 2009. The music stopped mid-note. My walkie-talkie hissed. And then my voice. My voice exactly, not a close approximation, not a similar timbre, but the specific individual character of my own voice, my Missouri accent, the slight rasp I get in dry air, the way I drop the ends of sentences just slightly when I'm speaking without thinking. Good, you're learning. I had not said that. My mouth was closed. My hands were at my sides. My walkie-talkie was clipped to my belt, and I had not keyed the PTT button. I stood on the second floor landing of Westfield Crossing at 1:30-something a.m. and listened to my own voice congratulate me from a device I had not activated. The fear that came with that was different from the fear of the girl in the food court. The girl was frightening in the way that unknown things are frightening. She was other, outside of me, a presence with its own rules and its own logic that I could keep at arm's length as long as I didn't acknowledge it. This was not that. This was the inside of my own voice, used as a tool by something that had either recorded it somehow or built a model of it from whatever it had access to, and it was being used to communicate with me in the most intimate way possible. In the voice I hear when I think about my own speech, the voice I recognize as me. Something was learning my voice. Something was practicing. I thought about what it would use it for once the practice was done. I turned to face the second floor corridor, dark storefronts on either side. The carpet up here was the 1990s kind, patterned, low pile, the kind of carpet that goes into public spaces to hide the evidence of foot traffic. Every store I could see was dark. Except one. At the far end of the corridor, behind a plate glass window that showed no sign of the grime that coated every other window on this floor, lights were on. A sign above the door, Sunrise Boutique. I did not go in. I want to be clear about this because what follows might make it seem like I had a choice, like the rule was a guideline and my restraint was a personal achievement. I did not go in, but I came close. I came close in the way a person gets close to the edge of a cliff not because they want to fall, but because some part of them needs to verify the reality of the drop, the primitive urge to make the danger legible, to give the fear a form it can work with. The store was lit from within with the kind of warm, inviting light that retail spaces learned in the 1990s, not the harsh fluorescent of productivity, but something softer, the light that says this is a pleasant place to spend money. Through the plate glass window I could see the layout, the circular clothing racks, the display tables with folded items arranged in fan patterns, the mirrors on the back wall. Standard boutique, standard arrangement, nothing wrong with any of it. Except the mannequins. There were 6 of them, positioned around the store in display poses, 1 by the window, 2 flanking the door, 3 further back among the racks. They wore the store's merchandise, dresses and blazers, and coordinated separates in the particular palette of early 90s fashion. Their faces were the featureless faces of department store mannequins, smooth and slightly too wide, their eyes just the faintest suggestion of shape rather than actual eyes. They were all facing the door, not in the casual way mannequins sometimes face a general direction, but precisely, deliberately, all 6 heads oriented toward the store entrance at an angle that said these had been moved recently with intention. I registered this, I noted it. I was about to note it and move on, because Rule 3 was very clear and the evidence of what happened to people who entered was embedded in the rule's language. You won't leave the same, and I had already made the calculation that my identity was worth more than my curiosity. Then I saw the jacket. On the mannequin closest to the window, a dark green Carhartt jacket, the specific worn-in shade you get after 2 or 3 years of regular wear, with a small bleach spot on the left sleeve that I had put there in 2022 when I was cleaning my bathroom. My jacket. The jacket I had left in the security office when I came upstairs, draped over the back of the desk chair because the office was the only warm room in the building. My jacket, on a mannequin in a store I had never entered, through a door I had never approached, in a building I had been in for less than 4 hours. I stood outside the glass and processed this. Then I heard the footsteps. They came from inside the store, from somewhere past the clothing racks, in the area I couldn't fully see from the window. Slow footsteps. The weight of them was irregular in the way that suggests something that has learned the sound of footsteps but hasn't yet gotten the rhythm precisely right. And as I stood there, they began to match mine. I had been shifting my weight slightly, the unconscious movement of a person standing still in discomfort, and the footsteps inside the store matched every shift. Every small transfer of weight, every micro-adjustment. I went very still. The footsteps went very still. I took a step backward, away from the window. The footsteps took a step, from inside the store, moving toward the door. I walked away from Sunrise Boutique at a pace that I chose very deliberately not to accelerate, because something told me, some instinct from the rules, from the logic of the place, that running would constitute a different kind of acknowledgement, a different kind of contract. I walked at the pace of someone who is choosing to leave rather than someone who is fleeing. The footsteps behind me, inside the store, ran. When I heard them running, my own pace broke. I moved faster. I hit the stairwell door at the end of the corridor and shoved through it and turned, one hand on the door, to look back. The mannequin in my jacket was standing in the doorway of Sunrise Boutique. It had not been in the doorway when I passed the store. It had been in the window. Now it was in the doorway, 20 feet from where I stood, one hand raised. Not in a wave, exactly. In the approximate shape of a wave. The gesture of a thing that has seen waving done and understood its general form without understanding what it expresses. I went through the stairwell door and let it close behind me. I stood on the landing for a moment, in the darkness, and breathed. The jacket, the footsteps, the running when I walked away. It was practicing. Whatever was in that store, whatever those mannequins were, or housed, or expressed, was practicing being me. It had my jacket and my movements and a rough approximation of my gait, and it was in the process of making the approximation more precise. Something in Westfield Crossing was building a version of me. I thought about the crossed-out rule, the one that ended if you don't, and then was red-inked into illegibility. I went back to the security office and sat down at the monitors and tried to think about something else for a while. I was not successful. At 2:45 a.m., the VHS player on the shelf above the monitors made a sound I had not expected. The mechanical click and whir of a tape ejecting itself, rewinding without assistance, and beginning to play. I had not touched the VHS player since arriving. The tape from the orientation packet was still in it. I had put it in the player out of habit when I arrived, some reflex toward having the object in its proper place, but I had not played it again, had not intended to play it again, had not considered it a factor in the shift. It was a relic, an artifact of a company's decision to communicate in an anachronistic medium. When it ejected and rewound itself at 2:45 a.m., I understood that I had been thinking about it wrong. The tape was not a communication method. The tape was the entity's memory. It rewound in approximately 40 seconds, faster than the mechanism should have been capable of, faster than the spindles inside the player could physically turn without stripping. I sat in the chair and watched the counter numbers spin backward and tried to decide whether I was going to watch what came next or take the opportunity to examine the emergency exit at the far end of the service corridor. I stayed in the chair. I told myself It was because the rules hadn't told me to leave. I'm not sure that was the real reason. The tape began playing. For the first few seconds, it W. As the training video I remembered, the supervisor, the polo shirt, the rehearsed smile, the footage of Westfield Crossing in its operational years. Then the image flipped. Not glitched, flipped, reversed, the video running backward with the supervisor's voice stretching out into a low drone that my ears tried to parse as speech and couldn't quite, and then, good. The voice, reversed and slowed and reconstructed by whatever I was hearing rather than by any technology I understood, resolved into words. You are the 19th guard. A pause, still backward, still in that degraded drone. None of them left. Another pause. The image on the monitor, the supervisor's reversed face, seemed to be looking at me now rather than at the camera. You won't either. And then, with a clarity that the forward version of the tape had never had, with a directness that the cheerful corporate production values had been designed to obscure. The Mal needs a day shift now. The tape cut to a different feed, not the training video. Security camera footage, grainy, time-stamped, shot from the camera directly above the desk where I was currently sitting. The same desk, the same chair, the same arrangement of monitors and landline phone and coffee cup. The time stamp in the corner read July 11, 2024, 6 days ago. In the chair was a man, asleep, chin on his chest, the specific slump of someone who had been awake too long. The angle was from above, so I couldn't see his face, not fully, but I could see his hands, the left hand specifically, the left hand resting on the desk. The pinky finger of the left hand had a red line around its base. I looked at my own left hand, the red line, the same red line on the same finger. I had never been to Westfield Crossing before last Monday. I had never applied for this job before last week. I had never, to my knowledge, been in a dead mal in Chesterfield at any point in my 24 years. But there was footage of me, of someone with my hands, with my build, with my left pinky marked the same way mine was marked, sitting in this office 6 days ago. The screen changed. White text on black. You've been here before. You just don't remember leaving. I sat with that. I sat with the full weight of what it implied, not just the straightforward horror of it, the I've been here and don't remember it, but the deeper implication, that whatever the mal had done the last time, whatever the price of the shift had been, was severe enough to have erased the memory of its own occurrence. That I had been through some or all of this before and had lost the experience so completely that I had come back for more. Or had been brought back for more. Or had never left. The third option was the one I couldn't look at directly, the one that hovered at the edge of the other two like a word you can't quite remember, present in its absence, demanding to be found. I thought about what it meant to be the 19th guard. I thought about the 18 people who had come before me, who had sat in this chair, who had read the rules and followed them, who had encountered the girl and the escalator and the store, and who had not left, not in the sense of not leaving physically, in the sense of leaving themselves behind. The tape clicked to black, ejected. The mechanism whirred and the tape sat in the open tray, doing nothing, finished with its communication. I checked my left hand. The red line on my pinky had not changed, not yet. I sat in the security office at 2:45 a.m. in a dead mal and tried to remember leaving. Tried to find in my memory any moment from the past week that felt constructed rather than lived. Any moment that felt like a gap. Any moment where the continuity of my experience had a seam in it. I found 3 small ones. Moments that, in retrospect, had the quality of scenes in a movie where the budget ran out and the editor had to cut corners, a Tuesday afternoon that I remembered beginning and ending, but not the middle of. A Wednesday morning where I woke up already tired in a way that sleep should have cured. A Thursday evening where I sat down to watch television, and then it was an hour later and I had no sense of what had been on. Gaps, small ones, the size of a person who had been somewhere else and returned without the memory of having left. The tone was designed for the inside of the human body. That's the only way I can describe it. Not just loud, invasive. The kind of frequency that bypasses the ear and goes straight to the place behind your sternum where fear lives, the place that responds before your brain has processed what it's responding to. The emergency broadcast system tone in an empty mall at 3:12 a.m., playing through a PA system that had no right to be operational, filling the space between every surface in the building with a sound that had teeth. I had both palms pressed against my ears before the first second had passed. I was humming, I want to say ICH. Osa's song with intention, that I reached for something comforting or significant, but the truth is that what came out was the theme song from a cartoon I watched when I was 6 years old. It was the first melody my brain found when I went looking, and I hummed it loudly, pressing my palms so hard against my ears that the cartilage ached, and tried not to let anything through. I'm not a person given to mysticism, but I will tell you this. The broadcast wanted inside my head. That is not a metaphor. The tone was the carrier signal, but beneath it, through the imperfect seal of my palms against my ears, through the buzz of my own humming, through the fundamental inadequacy of flesh as acoustic insulation, I could hear fragments of the broadcast's actual content. This is not a test. I hummed louder, the cartoon theme, harder. The tune of it was losing coherence, becoming just a vibration in my throat and chest, but the intention of it, the active, deliberate production of noise to block noise, seemed to be what mattered. Westfield Crossing has been purchased by a name, something that could have been a name or could have been a word in a language that uses names differently than English does. I don't know what it was. I caught maybe 3 syllables before I drowned them out with the full force of my humming and the memory of a Saturday morning couch and a bowl of cereal and the fundamental innocence of being small in a world that hadn't yet told me what it was. All personnel must report to the Carousel Frame. The broadcast ended. The silence after it was the loudest silence I have ever experienced. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of the absence, the negative space where something very large had been, still shaped like that thing, still carrying its temperature. I lowered my hands slowly. My ears rang with a high, clean tone that was the opposite of the broadcast's frequency. My nose was bleeding, not a lot, a thin line from my left nostril, barely more than a trace. I touched it with the back of my hand and looked at the smear of red. The first physical cost. Small, an almost gentle first payment, as if whatever managed the accounting of the rules understood that the full bill would be more effective if delivered in installments. I looked at my left hand. The red line around my pinky finger had deepened, not thicker, deeper, as if the mark had been pressed further into the skin by whatever process governed it. And at the very bottom of the circle, where the line was closest to the first knuckle joint, the skin had begun to do something that I do not have a clinical term for and do not want to invent a metaphor for. I will say only that it looked like the beginning of a separation. Like the finger was considering, at some cellular level, whether it needed to remain part of the hand. Rule 4's price was sensory sacrifice. Every broadcast I blocked was a payment. Every payment was a portion of myself rendered to the system of the mal, added to whatever accounting ledger existed down in the basement, in the walls, in the carousel base, at the center of the food court. I understood something in that moment that I had been moving toward for hours without quite arriving at. The rules were not protecting me from harm. The rules were the mechanism by which harm was administered to me in controlled, survivable doses. They were not a shield. They were a curriculum. Each rule followed, each price paid, was a lesson in giving pieces of yourself to something that required pieces in order to function. The rules were onboarding. I was not being protected from the mal, I was being prepared for it. I sat with my bloody nose and my deepening red line and the echo of a cartoon theme song in my head, and I tried to figure out what the end point of that preparation looked like, what the mal was preparing me for, what came after the lessons were complete. The answer arrived not as a thought but as a sensation, a warmth, sudden and unwelcome, in the security chair. The chair that had been cold for hours, that had been cold since I arrived, that had been cold with the cold of a building that had been empty for 15 years. It was warm now, specific to the chair, as if someone had been sitting in it just before I got here, or was sitting in it in some other version of right now, and the warmth was bleeding through. I stood up from the chair. The warmth faded. I remained standing for the rest of Act 7's duration, which is to say, until I went back to the laminated rules card and looked at it again, and this time the crossed-out rule was different. The red ink was still there. The physical crossing out had not changed. The Sharpie marks were as dense and deliberate as they had been when I first read the card. But through some process I cannot explain and will not attempt to rationalize, the text beneath the crossing out was now legible. Not faintly, completely, as if the red ink had thinned, as if my eyes had changed in some way that allowed them to resolve the text beneath the marks, or as if the rule itself had decided it was time to be known. It read, if you see your reflection waving, wave back. If you don't, it will exit the mirror and take your shift. I read it twice to make sure I understood it. Then I read it a third time because I wanted to be wrong about what it said. Then I put the card down because the third reading confirmed the second reading, and the second had confirmed the first, and there was no ambiguity to find. I had not waved at any reflection tonight. I had not, to my recollection, even looked at a reflection tonight. I had been avoiding them with an instinct that preceded my conscious awareness of why, the same instinct that keeps you from looking down in certain places, that keeps you from opening certain doors, that keeps you from asking certain questions. Some part of me had known, from the moment I read the crossed-out rule, that whatever was beneath the crossing out involved mirrors, and I had oriented myself away from every reflective surface in the building. But the GameStop. On the first corridor walk, I had passed a shuttered GameStop with a plate glass window and a dead television inside, one of the large display TVs that the store had kept near the window to catch the attention of passing customers. The TV screen was black and glassy. I had walked past it at close range. I had not looked directly at it. I had not waved. I turned to the bank of security monitors. Camera 6 covered the ground floor corridor near what had been the GameStop. The image was grainy, the resolution poor, but I could see the store. I could see the dark plate glass window. I could see, just barely, the dead television inside the window. On the television screen, a figure stood. A man, my height, my build, wearing my clothes. The grainy feed was not good enough for me to see his face, but his posture was mine. The specific way I stand when I'm trying to appear relaxed, weight slightly forward on the left foot, shoulders a quarter-inch too high, the posture of someone performing calm. He was waving. Had been waving, I realized, for some time. Standing in the dead screen of the GameStop television, waving at the security camera, waving at whoever was watching the security camera, which was me, which was the camera I was currently watching, which meant the figure on the screen, my figure, my build, my posture, had been looking back at me through 2 layers of digital mediation for longer than I'd been watching. And I had not waved back. I understood the rule now with the clarity of something that was already past the point of being useful. The reflection needed permission. The wave was the permission. If the wave was returned, the reflection stayed where reflections stay, inside the glass, inside the screen, on the other side of the surface that separates the copy from the original. If the wave was not returned, the rule kicked in. The reflection came out. And what did a reflection want when it came out? The shift, my shift. I was still processing this when my reflection stepped out of the screen. There is no way to describe this adequately. The screen did not break. The glass did not shatter. The figure inside the television simply stepped forward through the surface, the way you step through a door that was already open, and stood in the GameStop on the other side of the window and was no longer a reflection. He was me, the precise resolution of me that a high-quality mirror would show, wearing my clothes, wearing my face, standing in the body that I was also standing in approximately 30 feet away. He looked at me through the plate glass window, through the camera, at me directly in a way that the grainy security feed should not have been able to convey, but did. He smiled, the smile was mine, the shape of it, the slight asymmetry, the way the left side lifts a half second before the right. Mine. Thanks for the shift, man, he said. I heard it through the walkie-talkie, the sound clear and close as a person standing beside me. I've been waiting since last Tuesday. He walked toward the mall exit. I ran. The corridors of Westfield Crossing at 3:33 a.m., I can tell you from experience, exactly as dark and disorienting as the security footage makes them look. I hit 2 dead-end service corridors before I found the main corridor again. I found the entrance atrium, the main doors, the glass double doors that faced the parking lot where my car was parked. I put both hands on the push bar and pushed. The doors did not move. Not locked, they gave slightly, the ordinary resistance of a push bar being depressed, and then met something absolute. Not a mechanism, not a deadbolt. Just, no, the doors would not open, not for me, not now. Through the glass, I could see the parking lot. I could see my car. I could see, crossing the parking lot at a relaxed and purposeful pace, my Albal, my reflection, walking away from the mall the way a person walks when they're tired and glad the shift is over. He reached my car. He had my keys. I patted my pockets and they were gone, taken in the moment of crossing from the screen without my understanding how. He unlocked the car. He got in. The engine turned over. He drove away. I watched my car's taillights reach the service road and turn left, toward the highway, toward the city, toward the life I had arrived here in at 9:48 p.m. I watched them until they were gone. The mall doors remained closed. I was inside, my double was outside, and somewhere between the first time I arrived in this parking lot and this moment, the exchange had been arranged, not by accident, not by force, but by a rule I had failed to follow. A rule that had been crossed out, that had been hidden from me, that I had not known to follow until after it was too late to follow it. I sat down on the lobby floor of Westfield Crossing and looked at my hands. The left hand with its red line and its separating pinky, the right hand that was only a hand. The mall was very quiet around me. I thought for a while about the 18 other guards, about the wall of photos the tape had implied were somewhere in this building, all of them smiling, about whether they had also been replaced, or whether replacement was something the mall had developed more recently, or whether there were different outcomes for different guards, and I had simply drawn the particular outcome that involved a doppelganger. I thought about what my double was doing right now, whether he would go back to my apartment, whether he would sleep in my bed, whether my friends would notice, whether Marcus, when my double texted him tomorrow, would hear anything in the responses that struck him as slightly wrong, slightly off, slightly less than the Jake Sullivan he knew. And then I thought, my double will not make mistakes. My double is the version of me that this mall produced, refined, corrected. He won't make the errors I make. He'll be better at being me than I am. And I don't know what it says about me that this thought was, in some small and terrible way, a relief. I found the service door to the sublevel 10 minutes later. I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for anything, an exit, a phone line, a way to call for help. I found the door with the sign that said authorized personnel only, SUBLEVEL, and I went down.